Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of the SoundTraxx video series. Thanks for joining us today and thank you for using the link within our Model Railroad Hobbyist magazine ad online or the QR code on our Model Railroader ad to get to this video. This is the first in a two-part series showing you how to install a Tsunami2 21-pin NEM decoder in an Atlas HO scale General Electric model. We're going to cover the supplies you need, the tools you need, and we're going to show you the process involved with this easy installation to have this locomotive equipped with a sound decoder in a matter of minutes. Now, in order to complete this installation, you're going to need a few SoundTraxx supplies. For starters, you're going to need one Tsunami2 21-pin NEM decoder for General Electric, or what we call GE, diesel locomotives. And this is SoundTraxx part number 885010. It's readily available from most local hobby shops, as well as plenty of online retailers. Along with the decoder, you're going to require a few other SoundTraxx supplies for this installation. You'll need one 35 by 16 millimeter oval speaker. You'll also require the gasket for that speaker. It's a 16 by 35 millimeter speaker gasket to mount the speaker within the model. You're also going to need the SoundTraxx 30 gauge ultra flexible purple wire to wire the speaker to the motherboard itself. Now, I also want to let you know about this handy little 2-pin speaker connector. This is a 2-conductor JST type plug that plugs right into most models equipped with an NEM format motherboard. We don't sell this part at SoundTraxx, however, we've listed a few sources in the link below in the video, and we'll list them again at the end of the video as well for this particular part. It's a readily available, inexpensive part that allows you to connect right to the motherboard in a locomotive without any solder connections. Let's talk about the tools required for the installation next. So this is a fairly easy installation requiring a minimal amount of tools to complete the installation. Let's list those now. First of all, we have a pair of wire strippers and wire cutters for the speaker wires. We have an exacto knife to trim the kapton tape used to fasten all the wires at the end of the installation. We're using a small pair of tweezers to manipulate any wires or connectors in the model, as well as a pair of needle nose pliers to do the same thing for the larger connectors. We have a Phillips screwdriver that we're going to use to remove the couplers from the model, and we have a soldering iron with some solder and some no-clean flux to make the installation a very clean and easy one. Lastly, we have the ubiquitous flathead screwdriver used to move anything around inside the locomotive and help pry the shell loose from the frame. Now that we've talked about the tools, let's get into the installation. So now that we've told you about the supplies from SoundTraxx and the tools required for this installation, let's talk briefly about the area for the installation and the disassembly of the model. If you notice, we have just a generic baking tray here with a piece of 8.5 by 11 white paper on that. We use this when we're disassembling models at SoundTraxx to keep all the parts in one central location. We also use a small piece of foam that we place within the tray, so when we set the model in upside down, we don't risk damaging any of the fragile detail components on the model. So let's begin the disassembly process. We're going to go ahead and turn the model upside down and put it down on the piece of foam within the tray. And we're going to take our Phillips head screwdriver and remove the two screws, one in the rear and one in the front, holding the coupler boxes and coupler covers to the frame. These are the only two screws holding the shell to the actual chassis itself. So let's go ahead and do that. Insert the screwdriver, remove the screw, and we'll use our tweezers toward the end of the process here to gently remove the screw from the locomotive and to push the coupler out the back of the end sill. There we go, the entire assembly is removed. Now these things tend to come apart in 3 or 4 pieces, so we'll set that aside and we'll put it all back together for reassembly later. And we'll do the same thing with the front coupler pocket here as well, steadying the locomotive with one hand and using the screwdriver. Well, that screw came out right at that time. Sometimes you get lucky and that happens. And we'll go ahead and remove the front coupler box and set that aside. Now with those 2 screws removed, we can gently grab the locomotive by the fuel tank and by the top of the shell and simply pull the shell off. We'll set the shell aside for safekeeping for future reassembly. Let's talk briefly about some of the components inside the model here. You can see that the rear LED headlight is attached via a piece of tape to the speaker enclosure. We're going to have to remove this speaker enclosure as we're not going to be using it throughout the installation process. So we're going to use our tweezers and remove the piece of tape from the factory, holding the rear truck pickup wires and the rear LED wires in place. And once we have that off, we can discard that. We don't need that. And you see the LED simply slides right out from the speaker housing. We'll set that aside too. We'll need to reattach that later. And there's two Phillips head screws, that we'll need to remove to pull the speaker enclosure off. So we'll do that now. And once we have these two screws out and the speaker enclosure out, we'll set the speaker enclosure out and screws aside in case we ever want to remove the decoder from this model and reinstall the factory equipped parts. So now as we have this model disassembled, you can see that the model is equipped with a hole within the chassis, perfectly milled for a 35 by 16 millimeter speaker. So let's stop here and we'll discuss the rest of the installation process with the decoder and speaker next. So now that we've completed some basic disassembly of the model, we want to show you some of the key electronic components that come from the factory installed with this model. Now you can see this row of brass pins up on the top of the motherboard here, and this is the actual 21-pin interface. You'll also notice that if we move the wires aside that one of the pins is missing here. This is what we refer to as the index pin, and we need to pay very close attention to the way we mount the Tsunami2 digital sound decoder when we go ahead and do the actual installation process itself. You can also see that this particular model is equipped with a 2-pin JST type speaker connection that we talked about earlier in the video. When we install the speaker, we're going to go ahead and use that 2-pin harness to wire to the speaker for ease of installation. And we'll show you again at the end of the video where you can get those components. Now lastly, one other thing to consider on this particular model is that it is indeed equipped with an NMRA 8-pin plug as well. And we're going to have to remove this jumper before we put the 21-pin NEM decoder in there. Failure to remove that 8-pin jumper board could cause damage to the decoder in the future. So let's go ahead and remove that. To remove it, all we're going to do is simply insert our flathead screwdriver underneath the NMRA board and gently push up on either side of it until it comes off. And there we go. We'll set this aside for safekeeping for future use if we need it. So now that we've covered some of the basic electronics components within the model itself, including the 21-pin plug, the motherboard, and speaker connections, let's actually show you how easy it is to install that 21-pin NEM decoder. So now the first step involved with the process of installing a 21-pin NEM decoder is removing it from the package. As simple as that sounds, we want to point out a few things that we've included on our packaging to give you, the end user, some helpful tips and tricks when programming CVs. We've included some factory default function assignments toward the bottom of the packaging, as well as wiring diagrams, and the most commonly adjusted CVs on the bottom portion of the inside packaging. We recommend that you hold on to this card, put it aside for later as a quick reference for future programming of this decoder. So now that we've unpackaged our speaker gasket, and the decoder itself, all we have to do is simply pick up the 21-pin decoder and align the decoder properly with the index pin aligned with the index pin on the motherboard. So the header on this decoder, this black plastic portion of the decoder, always goes up on the actual motherboard. So we're simply going to push it straight down on all 21 pins nice and evenly so we avoid bending any pins. We're going to move all the wires aside on the model, insert the decoder right over the 21 pins, and we're going to use one finger and press down gently. And there you go. That's just how easy it is to install our Tsunami2 21-pin NEM decoders in most 21-pin models. So now that we've installed that Tsunami2 21-pin NEM decoder, let's see how easy it is to get the sound from the decoder to the speaker. The first step in the process is installing our 16 by 35 millimeter speaker gasket right over the rear enclosure on the shell here. Now to do that, we're going to pick up the gasket and we're going to go ahead and use our hobby knife, our exacto knife, and remove one side of the backing paper. There's two adhesive sides to this gasket, one that sticks to the frame and the other that sticks directly to the speaker as a mounting point. So once we have that started, we can use our fingernails and get underneath there and remove the backing paper, and we can throw that away. We won't need that. Now, to align the speaker gasket, we simply look at the shell, find the opening, and insert the gasket right over the top of it, right like that. Now, before we press down on that to give it a nice good seal, we want to make sure we have a good alignment on it. So we're going to take another quick look, a double check, and it looks good to me. So we're simply going to press down on the gasket, nice and firm against that metal weight there. And if you have any debris on the metal weight or any sort of oily residue, you want to clean that off first before applying the gasket. So now that we have the gasket installed, we're going to go ahead and remove the other side of the backing paper. And to do that, it's the same process. You simply insert the exacto knife underneath the backing paper, and you gently remove the backing paper. Now be very careful with these particular speaker gaskets, as they can delaminate. They can begin to come apart if you put the knife in too deep on the gasket. So now that we have that started, we're going to go ahead and remove the rest of the backing paper and set that aside. We won't need that, that's trash. And now, to install the speaker, what we're going to do is we're going to ensure that the speaker mounting tabs, the speaker wiring points here are faced toward the actual decoder, and we're simply going to line it up with our gasket and very gently press down right on the top of the speaker there, evenly across all the points to ensure a good mounting surface. And mounting the speaker is just as easy as that. So now that we have the speaker installed in this particular model, let's see how we're going to get the sound from that decoder to the speaker. Now this model is equipped with a motherboard which has a 2-pin JST type connector on it. Now we talked about this earlier in the beginning of the video and the availability of these 2-pin connectors. We're going to give you a link at the bottom of your screen now to go ahead and find some of these, and we'll also tell you again at the end of the video. They're fairly common and relatively inexpensive parts, and they allow you to simply plug right into the motherboard and wire to the speaker. So we're going to go ahead and plug that in at this point, and it's just a gentle press fit to plug into the motherboard. There we go, just that easy. Now we're going to turn the model around so we can show you how we're going to solder these wires to the speaker itself. You can see that the speaker is equipped with 2 pads on the back portion here, one for positive and one for negative. Polarity does not matter in a single speaker installation, so all we have to do is solder one of these purple wires to one of those pads. It doesn't matter which one. So now we've trimmed that particular plug and we've tinned the tips on these wires. And what we've done is we've applied some solder to the actual iron itself and run it up against the wires to tin the tip. And what this does is it makes for an easier connection between these wires and the speaker itself. Now in order to solder these wires to the actual speaker connections, all we have to do is apply a little bit of this no-clean flux. And we love this particular flux, it's electronics safe, and you don't have any cleanup after using it. So we're going to apply a little bit of flux to the actual speaker terminals themselves, and this will help that solder solidify a little bit better. And we're going to go ahead and grab the soldering iron and one of these particular wires, and we're going to press the wire against the speaker terminal, and then apply the soldering iron directly to the actual joint. We're going to hold it in place for a few seconds and remove it. And we'll test the joint. It's a nice solid joint there. We're going to do the same thing with the additional speaker wire here on the other side of the speaker. Press it in place, apply a little bit of heat from the soldering iron, wait a couple seconds, and give it a little tug. Make sure it's nice and solid. Don't pull too hard, you might actually rip the entire wire off. So now that we have the speaker wire soldered to this, let's talk about completing the installation next. So now that we've successfully completed the installation and installed all the components necessary for this model, let's test our work. We have our little power cap set up here from NCE with a piece of track to test this model. Now when we put it on the track, you should hear the locomotive come to life. The prime mover start sequence should start, and we're going to go ahead and test the horn, the bell, forward and reverse motor control, the headlight, and the backup light on this particular locomotive. Now we always recommend testing before final assembly so as not to break the fragile components associated with a lot of the details on the shell, such as the handrails, horns, or anything associated with the coupler components. If you do this before final reassembly, it prevents you from having to take that shell off and put it back on again just to make sure it's working. Let's go ahead and drop it on the track and we should hear it fire up. We'll make sure it's on the track. There we go. We hear the engine start sequence begin. Now it's very important too, anytime you're testing a model like this, to ensure that any loose wires and any components, such as this backup light, are out of the way and not making any contact with any part of the electronics in the locomotive or on the track itself. Let's take a listen to the horn, both long and short, as well as the bell. And let's go ahead and test forward and backwards motor control. So we're going to move the locomotive forward, and it should move toward the soldering iron. There we go. And we're going to go ahead and move the locomotive in reverse, and it works in reverse as well. Now we're going to switch back to the forward direction, and we're going to turn on the front headlight. The LED should illuminate, and there we go. And when we change the direction again on the throttle, we should see that backlight illuminate. Now we're going to go ahead and secure this backlight over the speaker before final installation of the shell to make sure we have a nice looking rear light effect. Well, now that we've tested the model, let's cover final reassembly. So now that we've tested our installation and we're happy with the overall installation, we want to make sure that all the excess wiring is secure underneath the shell when we reassemble it. If you fail to do so, you could see wiring get caught up in motor drives, mechanisms, and other parts of the shell to get caught up and potentially cause problems. So we've attached a couple pieces of kapton tape, one over the rear speaker portion here holding the rear rail pickups left and right, as well as the speaker wires in place, and another one over the top of the decoder to hold all the excess wiring that's associated with the circuit board over that. that. Let's reattach that rear headlight right now, and we're just going to go ahead and move that in place over the speaker, right about even with the end of the speaker there. Use another piece of kapton tape cut to about 1.5 inches long, and we're going to secure that LED, moving it around a little bit, make sure we get where we want it. Right about like that. Right even with the end of the speaker there. And we'll use that one piece of kapton tape to hold it in place. Make sure it's firmly in place, pressing down on it. And we're going to use one more piece of kapton tape to address these loose wires to the rear headlight. We don't want that to get caught anywhere in the shell either. So we're going to pull a little bit of slack out of the rear headlight wires here. And we're just going to tape them right down over the decoder using another piece of kapton tape. There we go. I'll put right on top of that other piece of kapton tape. That's a good enough spot for it. And we'll press any excess wiring down and out of the way on the circuit board itself. So now that we've got the wires secured, we can go ahead and reattach the shell next. With all the wires nice and secure underneath the shell and on the frame, we can go ahead and grab the shell that we put aside for safekeeping and reinstall it. It simply slides right over the locomotive and presses down firmly. Now what we're going to want to do is we're going to turn the locomotive upside down, and we're going to want to reinstall the coupler boxes. And these get installed just the same way they were removed. We're going to pick up the coupler box assembly, which is 4 pieces on this particular model. Make sure that it's nice and secure. And we're going to slide it in while pressing down on the frame to ensure that the coupler box mates well with its little housing right there. Once we have the coupler box installed, we're going to grab our Phillips head screwdriver, as well as one of these screws that we set aside from the disassembly process, and reinsert this particular screw. So now that we've reinstalled the rear coupler cover and coupler box, the same process applies to the front coupler. We're going to go ahead and grab the coupler assembly, press down on the frame, and insert the coupler assembly through the front pilot housing, gently sliding it into place. Once it's in place, we're going to use the tweezers to make sure that the top of the coupler box is lined up with the bottom and lined up well with the hole. And we're going to find our screw that we have on the tray here somewhere. Oh, there it is. And this is why we use the tray. It's a great way to keep all those little loose parts from flying everywhere else on your workbench. We're going to grab our Phillips head screwdriver, do the same thing. Insert the screw on the end of the screwdriver, and gently screw the screw back into the chassis. And now, since this is the only way that the chassis is attached to the body, we have no other further steps as far as reassembly goes. The chassis and body are now one, and let's cover final testing in this installation and making sure that both the headlight and rear light have ended up where we want them to be. So now that we've completed the reassembly process on this particular model, we want to do one final stage of testing to make sure that we've moved all the wires out of the way and nothing's pinched between the drive and the frame. So as we power up our power cab, you'll hear the locomotive come to life, and we're going to go ahead and turn on the front headlight. The locomotive direction is in forward, and you should see the headlight light up along with the number boards. And there we go. Turn them on and off to make sure we have control of them with the F0 key on our throttle. We're going to go ahead and put the locomotive in reverse, and you should see the rear headlight come on. I'm going to go ahead and turn the locomotive so you can see what the rear headlight's on. So we're going to put the track back where it belongs, and we're going to move the locomotive in forward and do the speed step 5. And you can see the locomotive responds well. Do the same thing. We'll change direction, move the locomotive in reverse, and you hear the engine RPM sounds ramping up on the decoder. Sounds very clean and crisp. Stop the locomotive. Now, one thing very important to do during the installation process and during the final testing process is to mute the sound on the decoder and move the locomotive to see if you have any wires caught in the drive mechanism. So we've muted the sound with F8 on the decoder, and I'm going to move the locomotive forward. And it sounds very quiet. Nothing's caught in the drive line of this particular installation. Same thing in reverse. So now that we've completed the installation process and successfully tested our decoder, let's wrap it all up and put it all together. So now that you've seen the installation process of our SoundTraxx Tsunami2 21-pin NEM type decoder with this Atlas model, we want to let you know that the installation process is very similar for models manufactured by Bowser, Intermountain, Fox Valley models, Rapido trains, Scale trains, and any other manufacturer using the 21-pin NEM interface. That interface allows for easy installations and allows you as the user to install your favorite SoundTraxx sounds in those models that may not be equipped with sounds from the factory. So we want to thank you for joining us on this first of a 2-part series of installation videos regarding this 21-pin NEM decoder, and join us again very soon for a second video showing you how we're going to configure this decoder in this particular locomotive. If you have any more questions about about SoundTraxx products, please visit our website at www.soundtraxx.com for full information about the entire SoundTraxx product line, including the rest of the Tsunami 2 decoders. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll hope to see you soon.